Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good. So let's start by introducing ourselves.
Sure. I'm Michael Brendan Dougherty, reactionary scold and undiscovered hypocrite, and a contributing editor to the American Conservative. And you probably have a nice description for yourself.
Well, I don't have anything quite so fancy on my business cards. I'm Michele Goldberg. I'm an author, most recently of The Means of Reproduction, and I'm a senior contributing writer at Newsweek and The Daily Beast.
Yep. And so we're going to start off by talking about, I think, what everyone's talking about, which is this debt ceiling fight and the fissures it seems to be opening up in the Republican coalition. And I think, why don't you describe kind of how you're perceiving this?
Well, to me, what's fascinating is that it seems to be the moment, first of all, when kind of Republican elites realize that they've created something of a Frankenstein monster by erecting an entire parallel alternative reality that's kind of meant to imprison the grassroots in a kind of in this kind of structure of misinformation. You know, it was fine when they were doing that with things like global warming, or when they encouraged kind of crazy beliefs about the age of the earth, or about, the efficacy of abstinence-only education, or all the other, kind of parallel systems of knowledge that they've created. All of a sudden they realize that they've created one, they fed people this stuff, they actually take it seriously, and now they're going to kind of torpedo our economy over it. And then on the other side, there seems to be this something potentially very interesting in when the grassroots realizes that all this stuff that Republicans have been feeding them, they never really meant, right? They never really meant that it was absolutely imperative to close the budget deficit at all costs. They never really meant that it would be okay to let the debt limit expire. I mean, it just seems to be this kind of fascinating moment of truth when, at a point at which, this maybe uneasy coalition of elites and grassroots populists realize that they've kind of been playing each other.
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't put it in exactly the terms you do, but I recognize the exact split that you're describing. And I think, however, that there's a lot on that grassroots populist side. There's always been a suspicion that Republicans aren't taking them seriously and that they're playing them. And, that motivated a lot of primary challenges in safe Republican districts in 2010 and in 2008.
Right.
And
even not so safe Republican districts.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And you can even see that sometimes they've managed to succeed electing one of their own, right? Like a real purist, even to the Senate with Rand Paul, or the House Justin Amash and some of the other kind of hardcore libertarian members. But I don't know. I mean, I think that the Tea Party isn't all that different from the conservative movement that's existed for a long time. And I feel like these betrayals continue to happen, and then, it depresses turnout for an election cycle, but then there's some fresh outrage and some new resolve introduced to do it right.
Right. I guess to me what's interesting about this particular betrayal, if you will, is that it's not just kind of one direction. It's not just, the normal thing of let's get the big, it's not kind of the normal what's the matter with Kansas type, let's kind of, rile everybody up about abortion and then use our majority to fight for lower marginal tax rates. To me what's interesting is that you're having this moment when the elites actually realize that they've kind of potentially created a catastrophe by encouraging this kind of riling up among the base. That they've, for such a long time, it's been this very kind of familiar story of elite manipulation of grassroots anger. Now it's kind of that anger has, far overflowed the bounds where the elites can control it, and they seem to be genuinely terrified. And it's also not a kind of a classic sellout in that, people are angry that somebody hasn't done more about abortion. I mean, this is the fact that people have been misled, in a really, really fundamental way, right? If there is a debt default, they've been told it's not going to matter, it'll be obviously pretty clear pretty soon that it does matter. And even the fact that all of a sudden all of these elites have, made it pretty clear that this is actually an intolerable possibility should, I would think, suggest to people that they were not being honest with them all along.
Right. I think that's part of it. I don't think that they're going to fail to reach a deal. So I don't know if we're going to be able to test out the hypothesis. I don't know if the grassroots belief that you can get away with not raising the debt limit is going to be tested. Mm-hmm. I do think that they're going to feel, as they did with TARP, that their party is in large part betraying them. I just find that seems to be such the normal course of things. I mean, in George H.W. Bush's presidency, when you had a debate similar to this, he raised taxes after, saying, read my lips, no new taxes. The Buchanan brigades charged into New Hampshire, and it fizzled out. There was a rally effect around Bush, and he lost. But he might not have lost without Perot getting in. So, maybe there is creating an opening. Maybe there's an opening being created for a populist right-wing candidate somewhere in the line. Although I think everyone in the presidential race right now is trying to pose as a populist. So I just am not sure where this energy and anger goes, besides knocking out a few incumbents next year. As to your point about the elites being frightened, I think that is a little bit true. I think that there's just always been this uncomfortable, it's been uncomfortable culturally, it's been uncomfortable politically for this coalition to be held together. And I feel like that's increasing as the country club demographic in the party holds on to power, but actually continues to be less and less important as a voting bloc in itself.
It seems like it'll come to a head what do you think it'll come to a head if they nominate Michele Bachmann, or even if Michele Bachmann gets close to being nominated. I think you'll see like a huge kind of rearguard mobilization of everybody with Wall Street ties or, kind of hedge fund ties.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. That's the thing is there will be... It does make next year very interesting because I thought that the race would shape up as Romney, an anti-Romney that could be accepted by the establishment, and then Bachmann and Paul, jockeying for 3 and 4. But Bachmann has really surged. And I think Rick Perry, who might have been that anti-Romney figure, I think he's going to be a total flameout. I think he's Fred...
Wait, why do you think that?
Oh, I just think he's Fred Thompson, too. The Tea Party in Texas hates him. He's got a lot of gimmickry in his budget. His record is thin. And I feel like, as with Fred Thompson 4 years ago, the dissatisfaction with the Republican field is just being expressed as a projection onto someone that's not in the field yet of positive feelings that I don't think will withstand 10 minutes of him actually campaigning. I just don't think it's going to work. And I'm surprised, too, because supposedly a lot of money is lined up on the side waiting for him to enter into the race. And meanwhile, Perry is doing things that scare the money people in the party, like hanging out with John Hagee a lot.
Right. And John Hagee's not even the worst of them, of the people that he's having this big prayer rally with. There's something... God, the last thing I want to do is defend Michele Bachmann, but I actually think that there is a whiff of sexism in the way that Perry is being defined as maybe like the more acceptable ultra-right candidate or the more acceptable religious right candidate, like she's crazy and he's kind of just really right-wing. He's at least as extreme as she is. I mean, there's kind of ideologically not a huge there's not a huge gulf between them. He has, at least as much of a kind of pastor problem as she does. He's at least as much of a theocrat as she is.
Yeah, I think the issue is that Bachmann, I don't think this is a perception. Maybe it is part perception. Everything in politics is part perception. But I think there's a feeling that Perry plays nice with a lot of the rest of the members of the Republican coalition. Mm-hmm. And that Bachmann is scarily principled in some of her stances. And so, I mean, if the Republican Party nominates Bachmann, I will be absolutely shocked, to be honest. It hasn't happened yet that the establishment hasn't been able to exercise its veto and place its imprimatur on the candidate.
You're right. No, I mean, I would be shocked too, but the one thing that would make me think otherwise is the whole 2010 election cycle, where certainly in individual states, the establishment completely failed. And you had people like Sharon Angle and Christine O'Donnell.
No, that's true. Even Rand Paul, there was an establishment candidate that received the backing of Cheney and others, but Paul was able to split off just enough of the normal Kentucky GOP, and he got the endorsement of Palin and others, and was able to run right past Trey Grayson. I mean, maybe we're coming to the point where the party can elect or nominate a candidate like that. I mean, would you consider that healthy or unhealthy? I mean, healthy that the elites in the party are dethroned, or unhealthy that the unwashed masses are storming the gates?
I would consider, I wouldn't quite put it in terms of health that the unwashed masses are storming the gates, but certainly I think that when you have, basically I would consider it, two things. One, if somebody like Michele Bachmann could be the nominee of one of the two major political parties in the United States, I would consider that not just unhealthy, but terrifying. And I think that there are good and bad kinds of populism, and healthy and unhealthy kinds of populism. And so, although it certainly, might be more democratic, right, in that you would kind of have, the will of the people as opposed to the will of a few money men. Basically I see the Republican Party now as, a kind of frothing populist nationalist movement straining at the carapace of, a kind of establishment corporate lobby. And at least the one thing that you can say for the establishment corporate lobby is that at least they don't want to kind of completely pull the rug out from all of the institutions of American life, right? They're in some sense small c conservative, as opposed to being kind of a radical right-wing movement. So, right. I don't know. Do you think it would be healthy if you basically could have, the Tea Party had full reign within the Republican Party?
It's funny. It feels like I should have an answer to that. I would say, I guess I view this with a little bit of indifference, because I don't particularly like either brand of politics right now. I wish this wasn't I wish neither of these were the poles of power in America's center-right party or far-right party. On the one hand, my assessment of Michele Bachmann is, to slip into Latin, she's all fides and no ratio. It's all faith, no reason. In the American context, that means not just religious faith, but also kind of ideological faith. I think we saw some of that with Bush, actually a lot too. I think we saw the same imbalance between faith and reason.
No, not the same.
What?
I mean,
no?
the fact is, I mean, look, Bush is like Henry Kissinger compared to her, right? I mean, Bush is, this kind of like epitome of cold calculation and erudition compared to Michele Bachmann. I mean, it's amazing that I remember, during the Bush years, people I knew, sometimes we would say something like, oh my God, if only he could be more like Reagan. And people I knew who were adults in the 80s would say, Christ, we never imagined that we would look back on Reagan with fondness. And sometimes we would say, God, can you imagine if in the future it gets so bad that we sometimes look nostalgically at George W. Bush?
But doesn't that happen to every single... I mean, isn't always the current opposition always the worst in history? I mean, isn't that always sort of our feeling? Like, Clinton, when Clinton was president, conservatives were inventing conspiracies about how he actually murdered people.
Right.
Or, and when...
but do conservatives look back fondly now on, like, FDR or LBJ or Jimmy Carter?
Well, not LBJ, but some have looked back, with fondness. It depends on people in a partisan debate use that all the time. They'll say, "Oh, well, I want, why can't the Democrats be more like Harry Truman and be more hawkish and show strength?"
Right. Well, yeah, Harry Truman. That's going kind of far back, right?
Right. I think the American Spectator had a cover that compared Obama unfavorably to Jimmy Carter, and so I feel like that's always a part of it. I feel like I'm going to defend my comment that saying Bachmann is a little like Bush. I think you're right. The intensity is ratcheted up quite a bit, and she has no, Bush Jr. grew up at least with, the scent wafting in the air of his father's patrician Connecticut temperament. Bush didn't have that. Whereas Bachmann is all Midwest convert, evangelical convert temperament. And I find that temperament is more, to me personally, grating. It's more grating to liberals. And it is...
Well, it's not just grating. It's that she's kind of immersed in a total parallel reality in a way that Bush had kind of one foot in that reality, but he also had one foot in a world of, both kind of Harvard and, the world of his father and the kind of, statesmen surrounding him. He kind of didn't, he didn't come out of a world that basically, believes that the founders worked tirelessly to end slavery, that believes that there's, that the United States is on the verge of being folded into a North American Union and is going to adopt a one world currency. I don't think he would believe if he were still in politics that failing to raise the debt ceiling would be this kind of bracing moment of kind of rebirth. I mean, there almost seems to be something apocalyptic in this willingness to see the debt ceiling not raised. I mean, I know that she doesn't believe that the United States will default, but I was looking recently. I started asking people, what is the Tea Party theory of the kind of debt ceiling denialism, right? Like I've done, I know enough about intelligent design and creationism to know some of the contours of their alternative theories to evolution. So I was curious, like, what the hell do they think is going to happen? If they don't raise the debt ceiling. And, there's people like Louis Gohmert who's saying, well, we could sell off land to pay our bills, which is just amazing. I can't think of what land he's talking about, or, if he's talking about some kind of fire sale of the national parks. But then I looked, Bruce Bartlett, I guess, has testified about the roots of some of this stuff. And, some of it lies in kind of ultra far right, like, Austrian economics, all taxes are theft. And then some of it, there is also this evangelical strain, that this will be some kind of jubilee in which the slate will be wiped clean and we can kind of, there'll be some kind of almost rebirth. It's really weird, but that strain is there.
See, I haven't encountered that strain. I mean, obviously, I've encountered the Austrian economic strain, although in a way that's milder, in the sense that that actually is built out of institutions and out of the work of, Nobel Prize-winning economists.
Well, one Nobel Prize-winning economist, right?
Right. But they have they have long-term institutions, to develop that thought, whereas this evangelical thing I haven't run into. I mean, I've just heard a lot of, what strike me as totally ad hoc justifications. I mean, I don't think that the debt ceiling denialism is deep in the grassroots. I mean, I don't feel like if you talk to Joe Palin supporter out in the heartland that he could answer more than 3 questions about the debt ceiling. I'm not saying that as a criticism of him. I'm just saying their position is anti-elite, anti-expert, and they react. They know when they're being talked down to, and they're being talked.
Sometimes you talk down to people who don't know as much as you do, right? Like I don't.
Of course.
I mean, to me, it's idiotic. It would be idiotic for me to expect, for example, Paul Krugman not to talk down to me. At least about kind of matters of macroeconomics. The idea that, just kind of that you can intuit the right answer to kind of complicated technocratic questions, as well as somebody who's made a study of them, this is like a real American sickness.
It's an American sickness, but it also, or it can be, but if your conviction is that this elite class is illegitimate, is self-interested, and is vampiric, and that it is socializing its risk and privatizing its profit on your back, if you believe that, then, this person...
I totally disbelieve that, but then...
Well, exactly. That's why I'm driving this wedge at you, like 100 miles an hour, is that, I think that is a feeling that's also in the Tea Party, and so it's not just that they say... I think many Tea Party people, if you really back them in, they'll say, yeah, you know a lot more about this, but I don't trust you. I think you're robbing me. I think you're out to get me. And so they just want politicians, they want these freshman Republicans to say no. And, they're also reading, and they're right to do this, that in previous debates... in previous compromises under Bush and under Reagan, that the new taxes went into effect as promised, and the spending cuts never happened. Spending went up during Reagan's term. Spending went up during George H.W. Bush's term. And so even there are facts of history that tell them not to trust that this deal any sort of 2-for-1 deal is going to work. The problem is they don't have... The problem for them is they don't have, all 3 branches of government, and so they can't get an all spending cuts deal. So they're just acting as this indigestible force. So, I agree with you. I want a country that functions where the institutions are trustworthy and there's widespread social trust in them. I just don't feel like we're operating in that environment, and I don't feel like the Tea Party is wrong to feel like we're not operating in that environment.
Well, of course not, but that doesn't really matter. That's to me, that's kind of a dodge, right? Like, okay, so this is going to be, I shouldn't be making, I'm kind of crossing a line by making this analogy, and I don't want to do that.
Right.
So I'm not trying to make a Hitler analogy. I'm just kind of reaching for
go for it.
Exaggerated historical example, which is that right-wing populists in Weimar Germany were also not wrong to feel like the institutions of their government were broken. They weren't wrong to feel like there were war profiteers who had made a lot of money off of their suffering. They weren't wrong to feel like their economy was out of control, they were wrong to, choose scapegoats to assign all of these ills to, and to basically believe kind of demagogic theories about illegitimate kind of blood-sucking foreigners. Right? Like a lot, like most right-wing populism, any kind of right-wing populism. If you look at, for example, the growth of the white supremacist movement in the 80s, and like a lot of the kind of posse comitatus stuff that came out of the Farm Belt, right? It was people, it really got its start during the farm crisis when a lot of people were losing their farms. So they were certainly right to be angry at banks. They were certainly right to feel like they were being taken advantage of. They were not right to then adopt a kind of racialized producerist theory that a international class of Jewish bankers was trying to suck them dry from above while empowering, a kind of parasitic underclass to destroy them from below. And so, similarly, certainly at a very basic level, the Tea Party is right to feel like things are stacked against them. Wall Street has too much power. The party elites are taking advantage of them. To then say that means that kind of all knowledge except for their own ideological fantasies is invalid, and to basically adopt this kind of completely nihilist course towards the functioning of a modern economic system. I think that just because you can kind of justify the roots of a slightly out of control populist movement, that doesn't really neutralize. It doesn't mean that the populist movement is not itself dangerous. And I think we've gotten to the point where this is dangerous, right? We've gotten to the point where a significant part of our government is in hock to people who absolutely refuse to believe in dispute, economic theories that are not really in dispute among any experts except at the very fringes, and are willing to blow off the entire global economy to vent their frustration at Wall Street.
Well, if they succeed in preventing the debt limit from being raised, I might agree, but I agree on one level that I don't mean to just dismiss them, dismiss problems of populism. I am a conservative. I hate populism. And I happen to think it's bigger than populism, and it's bigger than right-wing populism. I think any time you experience a broad democratization in anything, that the people, I feel like every demos, to use my own Hitler analogy, I feel like every demos has a raging, screaming folk hidden inside, waiting to get out. We've seen the democratization, essentially, of information through the internet and other forms of media, even through Fox News, where people demand to have information tailored exactly to their taste rather than to reality. And so I feel like we're seeing the outworking of that politically, and I don't think it's going to be pretty. But on the other hand, as far as the Tea Party's danger to the Republic, overwhelmingly, they're still voting for Republican politicians who still overwhelmingly don't do the craziest things that they're being asked to do.
Well, now this is the first time that they really are, right?
Well, let's see the test. I want to see this test work out. Just like I want to see the party, not saying I want to see, but before I'm ready to say that we're living in this extraordinarily dangerous time.
I don't know. If I didn't say extraordinarily dangerous, I think potentially very dangerous.
Okay. I'm willing to believe that too. And I believe, I believe it can get worse. But if, I was having this debate over email with someone. If we had, maybe the worst imaginable economic meltdown, I was thinking this after David Brooks's column, in which he talked about the Republican Party not being a normal party anymore. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, okay, if the worst happens, if the dollar collapses, our financial system stops working altogether, and we're jumping to 30-40% unemployment in America, and heading towards Zimbabwe levels. I was thinking, you know what? I'm not going to blame Joe Palin. They're not going to hang, the average person that went to a Tea Party Nation conference. They're going to hang.
No, I'll blame the people who I'll blame the people who who manipulated them, who gave them control, who fed them a lot of fantasies.
They'll hang them, and then they'll hang Tim Geithner and Bernanke and all the other professionals too. I mean,
the last thing I want to do is defend Ben Bernanke or Tim Geithner.
Right.
But if the Republicans reject a debt ceiling increase against the best efforts of Bernanke and Geithner, I think it's crazy to blame them just to say, well, they contributed to a situation of distrust. I mean, they're trying to, in this particular crisis, they are the responsible voices in the room. You can blame them, I guess, for failing, but that's very different than saying that it's their fault.
Well, to me, it's like I want to spread blame everywhere. But I would say, my feeling is, if your system can't handle one sustained populist shock, it's not the fault of the populists. It is the fault of your institutions, whether educational, financial.
Yeah, but that you might as well just say that you can't blame them because the whole thing deserves to come crumbling down.
Yeah, I'm not.
That strikes me as like an excessively nihilistic position, even for a conservative.
Even for a conservative, especially for conservative, actually. I'm not saying I do not want the system to go down. I enjoy the system as it is to a large degree. I enjoy being able to eat and not trying to hunt or gather my food. I enjoy staring into this giant iMac. I am pro-system in that regard. But I am saying that, I feel like I'm agreeing even with a more radical left critique of the current system too, saying that there needs to be some kind of internal reform and internal discipline, or some awful populist movement will be able to knock you over. And for me, I guess maybe just tribally, I don't side with the corrupt incumbents. I don't know if that's because I'm a Mets fan or a conservative. It's just, that's just my natural instinct. I don't think it's explainable. But I'm waiting to see if we're actually, until the Tea Party elects Michele Bachmann, until this debt ceiling deal completely falls apart and Wall Street falls flat on its back, I don't know. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to go after the grassroots as much as I would be, the elites in the party who are failing them. And I agree with you broadly that it has been a bad idea to create this alternative reality of information and ideology for them. And in that sense, I'm an anti-movement conservative. Hello?
Hello? I'm thinking, should we move on? We probably should, right?
Yeah, it's funny. We absolutely should. Well, one thing we were thinking
we were going to talk about... Do you want to talk about the billboards?
Yeah, let's talk about the billboards. There was a thing in Oakland, a controversy in West Oakland. There was a pro-life group who put up a billboard that showed a little tiny African-American child, and it said across it, "Black and Beautiful," and below it had a URL that said something like toomany-aborted.com. And it was anti-abortion billboard framed in the language of Black empowerment.
Right, and this isn't the only one, right? There was one in New York, there was one in Chicago, that some of them said that the most dangerous place for an African-American child is in a mother's womb.
Right.
I don't know if you followed this new movie that's coming out. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
There's a new... So this is actually its own little micro trend that I find kind of fascinating. Is this new anti-abortion feature cinema? So there was the one movie called The Life Zone, made by a New Jersey Republican candidate who made a thriller about someone who kidnaps women from an abortion clinic and holds them against their will and forces them to give birth. And was, I guess, the hero. But then there's this other movie that's coming out soon about...
Wait, I'm still trying to get over it. The hero of the film is a kidnapper.
There's a last minute twist, right? So it turns out at the end that they're all in purgatory, and that the ones who kind of acquiesce to their situation and are happy to have the babies in the end go to heaven, and the one who's fighting to the end ends up going to hell.
Oh, okay.
But then there's another movie, and I wish I remember what the name of it was, but there's another movie about it's like set in the future, and there's some kind of black nationalist terrorist group that has succeeded in getting all of the abortion clinics shut down. And so, and there is this history, right? There's, black nationalist groups in the 70s bombed clinics and, burned down reproductive health clinics. And so I think you basically see all white conservative groups now trying to align themselves with an earlier movement. There's a huge in general desire among white religious conservatives to wrap themselves in the mantle of the civil rights movement.
Yeah, of course.
And so it's especially, I guess, tempting in this regard. And I think people are, the women I know who are really offended by it are really offended by it for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, because it really strains credulity to believe that these, again, white conservative groups, that Sarah Palin has raised a lot of money for, among others, that, oppose any sort of programs to help poor pregnant women or poor pregnant mothers, that they are really concerned above all with the fate of African-American mothers and their potential children. And then there's also this campaign of misinformation to try to paint groups like Planned Parenthood and groups that support family planning as being, eugenically minded and kind of essentially racist, using a couple of scraps of genuine history woven into a huge amount of deception.
Well, there's a lot of, it's funny, obviously there's that, I don't know if it was James O'Keefe, but there were those pro-lifers who did those calls where they would call in and try to donate money and dedicate it to the abortion specifically of a black child, and then they would say something incriminatingly racist to boot, and just, record the person on the other end saying, thanks.
But, the tricky thing here, right, is that if you, I don't know if you've ever spent any time with people who do fundraising for any kind of organization, but they often tell you that one of the worst things about being a fundraiser or being a development person is that you have to humor a lot of crazy rich people.
Oh, yeah. That's utterly true.
So the same thing when James O'Keefe when they did that sting of the NPR woman, and they said a lot and got her to kind of
exactly
along. To me, that says very little about the kind of overarching philosophy of Planned Parenthood.
No, I agree. I guess I'm just free associating with sort of recent activism.
Well, no, there's a lot of recent activism designed to demonstrate this. Really, if only there was, part of the reason I think it's in such incredibly bad faith is that, African American women do deserve an abortion rate as low as that of white women. And American women deserve an abortion rate as low as that of European women. And this is a movement that has done so much to make that impossible, that does so much to thwart that. I remember talking to when, during the whole debate
wait a minute. Wait a minute, though. I mean, in Europe, there are more restrictive laws on abortion. I mean...
Well, that's not exactly true. That's complicated, right? So, like, take France, for example. So France, you're right that France has more restrictive laws in terms of the dates, right?
Right.
But they also have... But it's also free and widely available, as is birth control. So the reason that they have lower abortion rates, I mean, 1% of abortions are after late-term abortions, right? The vast majority of abortions are in the first trimester, and so are freely available under all of these different regimes that we're comparing. And so first trimester, so that's not the reason that they have less abortions in Europe. The reasons that they have less abortions in Europe is because they have less unplanned pregnancies in Europe. And you know, I think it's pretty obvious why that is. I don't think anybody believes that the French or the Dutch are more chaste or puritanical than we are.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember where I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I mean, I applaud you for saying that black women in America deserve as low an abortion rate as white women, rich white women. And for me, I don't... it's not a surprise that people want to wrap themselves in the civil rights movement. Because
of course, it's not a surprise, but it's particularly galling when it's people who are rooted in a movement that emerged in reaction to the civil rights movement. In the same way that I don't mind when people pretend that they're all about protecting the Jews and protecting Israel, but when somebody like Glenn Beck does it, it just twists the knife a little bit more. It's just that much more irritating. You know, kind of the biggest purveyor of basically anti-Semitism in America since Father Coughlin decides that his real mission in life is to save the Jews. That's
okay, but wouldn't, I mean, I feel like that would be something, I'm not saying that you should be grateful for anyone else, because I think most political actors are horrible people anyway. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it should be, like, the left should be saying, man, did we do such a great job that all these southern white conservatives are using the language of black empowerment for their causes. That they identify with this, and that they even want crazy black candidates like Alan West to represent these.
I think that it's certainly a sign of progress that nobody wants, that everybody now considers being called a racist to be one of the greatest insults you can hurl at a person. I mean, to the point where I think that Republicans think that calling someone a racist is actually a worse sin than actual racism. That's another story. So yeah, so okay, great, applaud. I'll take 5 minutes to to clap for that. However, when you actually then kind of use that position to advance policies that are antithetical to the interests of African Americans, and especially that are antithetical to the stated politics of Martin Luther King, right? Martin Luther King was a big fan of Margaret Sanger and, gave speeches about the importance of family planning. To pretend that you were trying to shut down these clinics in the name of his movement is galling.
Right. I mean, but that doesn't stop even... Coretta Scott King from, not Coretta.
No, not Coretta. Not Coretta.
Not Coretta.
His niece.
His niece.
Yeah, okay. Does his niece get to, his evangelical niece gets to claim his mantle on, as opposed to his own words, his wife's words. Of course you have of course you're going to do this. It's expedient. It's a backhanded tribute, I suppose, to Martin Luther King, that now he's like, this kind of cozy, whereas before he was this very controversial and very radical and very kind of divisive figure. Now he's, like everybody's kind of cozy best friend. Mm-hmm. So that's great. It's great that now kind of Martin Luther King has achieved an unassailable position in our politics, right? That everybody wants to be Martin Luther King's friend.
But that's the thing, is actually my objection to it is that this is a kind of weirdo sentimentalism. Not that I mean, and the thing is, I would push back on.
Well, wait, tell me what you mean by weirdo sentimentalism.
I just find it weirdo sentimental for conservatives to make the argument on billboards, black and beautiful. I find that weird. I mean, not that I expect...
So wait, that's your problem with it? That they say black and beautiful?
No. Not that it says black and beautiful. But I don't know. I guess I have a problem with this weird advertising culture in our politics. And I feel like that does actually diminish those words, black and beautiful. But I don't have a problem... I don't have a problem with conservatives being concerned and believing themselves to be concerned for black Americans. And I do think that your contention that they are trying to advance policies that hurt them, they would dispute that, right? I mean,
of course they would dispute. Well, to a certain extent, they would dispute it. Yes, of course they would dispute it. I don't think that they think of themselves. I think, almost everybody wants to believe themselves to be well-intentioned and doing the right thing. Although I'm starting to think that one of the reasons I keep misunderstanding politics is because I misunderstand the extent to which that's not the case for some people, and some people really are just genuinely craven and self-interested. However,
see, this is where we're starting to agree. I mean, deep down, I mean, I'm willing to defend a lot of sincere-hearted people I've met, but I think they really believe that their free market policies will benefit.
I think most people believe. I think most people in politics. Again, I'm always shocked. I recently reviewed this book by this woman named Lisa Barron, who was. It's a kind of harrowing book. It opens with her. She's Ralph Reed's spokesperson, and opens with her giving a blowjob to Ari Fleischer at the.
I read your review, which was really fun.
but that book genuinely shocked me. It genuinely shocked me that somebody would just kind of very deliberately act against their own beliefs because they wanted to be famous and make a lot of money, without kind of trying to justify it to themselves.
Right, and that's funny. That's a very good way to clarify it, because I believe there's a lot of political actors that are like that. Yes, just careerist, cynical, etc. How my gripe with human nature in politics is deeper. I guess it goes to Machiavelli and the Italian realists, which is that I really believe most people engage in politics in a kind of tribal way, and that ideologies are you choose your side first based on your tribe, and then ideologies are then rationalizations of that choice after the fact.
But it's funny because by that theory, right? That theory in certain ways kind of negates, or at least complicates, what you just said about they believe that they really are helping black babies and black children, right? They've chosen the side, which is the side of kind of white Southern nationalists. That's the starting point. I mean, that's the starting point of the modern cultural right. It's like
although they're not for Southern.
Is a white Southern reaction to the civil rights movement. They've chosen that side. All these other theories about helping black babies or whatever, to me, that seems to be kind of tacked on a lot later.
Right. Well, it is. Historically, it is tacked on a lot later. And it's also tacked on when tons of people from New York and Connecticut moved to the South and started filling up states like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. But, I mean, I think of the conservative movement, right? Most people don't join it with this kind of full knowledge of its history that you or I have.
Why do they join it?
Why do people become conservatives?
Well, yeah, especially like a kind of, someone who's not, I mean, I certainly understand, why maybe a certain kind of someone who's kind of resentful white populist might become a conservative. But why do you think, because I have a sense, I think, of why people, of what attracts people to the tribalism of liberalism, right? Like
okay. See, this is interesting. I'd love to hear you talk about this, because I talk at length always about these tribal conservative tendencies, etc. And I've heard you talk about it, but I want to hear a little bit about the tribalness of liberals, and because I feel like living in New York, I experienced that. I experience when people meet me and find out I'm a conservative, there's usually, at first, an expression of pure, unadulterated, bigoted hatred for me.
It's not bigot. Wait. It's not bigoted to hate somebody's beliefs. It's not, right? It's very different to hate someone for.
Okay, well,
right?
I mean,
to say that like your beliefs are appalling. That might be rude, but that's your beliefs are not immutable characteristics.
No, I'm talking about more something that it seems a little bit more personal than like a fun debate. I mean, fun debate, like you think my beliefs are appalling, that's fun to talk about. But I mean, usually there'll be a first.
I mean, there's a couple of different things. I mean, first of all, I think that everyone does genuinely have things that you believe that you can kind of have a fun debate about, and then there are things that you believe that no decent people cannot disagree about, right? Like, we can have a fun debate about things we've been debating. We can't have a fun debate about, I don't know, whether or not Jews are blood-sucking parasites, right? We can't have a fun debate about whether or not gay people should be rounded up and put into camps. I mean, those are big outliers, but I think, there are other things as you get closer that I think, to me, it's... But the more
tribal your political associations are, the more things you put into that realm of no decent person can possibly believe or be this, this way. So the more tribal you are, the more tribal you are. And that's why, what's funny, like an example on the extreme far right is like maybe someone who wraps their entire identity around Austrian economics, and then you propose to them a publicly funded lighthouse, and they start making Hitler analogies. And,
but part of the thing about New York, too, is that to me, New York, we were actually going to talk about New York at the end of this conversation, right? And to me, New York and Brooklyn in particular, where I live, is, for somebody who grew up in the suburbs, hating it, dreaming of a place where I was going to go, and there was, and everybody was going to be kind of as weird as I was. The kind of, although I understand that there's something ironic about talking about pluralism in the context of a kind of boho gentrified neighborhood like the kind I live in.
Right.
At the same time, New York does have a level of pluralism and kind of openness to the outcasts, that kind of come from wherever they are. I mean, that is so magical. And so when I wish I could remember I can't even remember who kind of came up with this schema, but somebody was talking about, maybe you'll know what I'm talking about. Somebody had come up with this schema of kind of like the essential values of conservatives and the essential values of liberals. And I think liberals, it was things like fairness, maybe individualism. Conservatives at the top was something like purity, obedience. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember I don't remember. I mean, there's lots of lists like this, but I don't, this one sounds more social scientific.
To me, there's a couple of things. So one is that the whole reason, that you come to New York City is that you don't believe that kind of purity in the kind of cultural sense is a value. It's like almost an anti-value. To me, cosmopolitanism, as cliched as that is one of the highest values in the world. As is kind of erudition. I mean, not that I'm such an example of it, but kind of having a city with a vibrant cultural life, a city that is kind of a city that gives people the opportunity to transcend the boundaries of their family or the community that they were born into. I mean, to me, those are absolute values and absolute liberal values. And so it's always shocking when you see somebody in New York City who seems to take advantage of that life and kind of enjoy it and revel in it, and nonetheless rejects what I see as the kind of values that underlie it.
Mm-hmm.
And that want. So to me, there's something. I always think that there's a big difference between, kind of small town conservatives or people who are conservatives in conservative communities And then conservatives like maybe like David Brooks or Ross Douthat or some of these, you know, basically kind of urban minority conservatives within their own overwhelmingly liberal milieus.
Yeah.
And to me, they that is like a kind of a different orientation. It's more about a reaction to certain things that are smug and annoying in the culture that surrounds them than it is any genuine desire to live in the kind of world that conservative policies and conservative culture would create.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I mean, that's a very provocative thing to say, I think, and I'm going to just patter while I process it. I agree with you that for Ross Douthat, or at least for me, it's partly a reaction to the smug. I mean, I grew up a train ride outside of New York City, and my entire family is liberal, and I went to Bard College.
Oh my God!
So it's like,
that's not. Wait, really?
So it's kind of overdetermined, right?
Yeah, I mean, Bard College. You know, I went to Berkeley, right? And so. I went to Berkeley for graduate school, and I lived in San Francisco, and by the time I left San Francisco, I kind of felt like I was a Republican, at least by San Francisco standards. But, you know, then I came home, and I you know, snapped out of it.
Right. No, that's fine. I mean,
Why did you go to Bard College?
That's a story we should talk, we should get a drink, and I should tell you about that, actually. It's a good story. Let's just say I was... I'll give you the thumbnail.
I mean, Bard College could probably make a Republican out of me.
Well, because I'll give you the thumbnail. The thumbnail was, as a teenager when I was applying to schools, I was still kind of a teenage convert to evangelicalism. Mm-hmm. And I saw Bard as like an awesome mission field. I was like single-handedly going to go there and change hearts and minds.
Are you writing a novel about this?
No. The actual result was I left after 2 years because I was so deeply socially ostracized. But I actually did enjoy the campus. I did enjoy, there was something about the campus that attracted me, and I enjoyed it. And I don't think there is, I don't think conservatism is about just preserving, I don't know, like the forest-flung exurbs of Nashville and nothing of New York or Brussels or London. My biggest complaint with democracy was that historically, it seemed to make the elites less cosmopolitan. So instead of having, divine and aristocratic rulers, not divine, but aristocratic rulers who shared bloodlines across the continent of Europe, you had to demand more and more for a kind of... This is not a well thought out criticism, I have to say, because although that's true, our elites are certainly, our kind of Davos going elites are certainly right? I mean, is there really... Oh no, now they are. No, I think we've gone, I think the worst aspects of nationalistic democracy historically are a little bit behind us. At least I hope. At least in Europe and America, I hope. There's still lots of problems in the third world as far as movements to try to purify the nations that around the earth. I don't like that at all. But so I don't see. I mean, I just have never felt conservatism to be against those things that you say rightly that I would enjoy about big cities. And I don't think that, I'm having trouble grasping what that survey meant by purity or social purity.
It's
all right.
It's a little bit too vague for me to.
It's all right, and I've always felt like, one thing about New York, and is sort of somewhere buried in my ancestral memories. My grandmother grew up in Brooklyn, in kind of like a hardcore immigrant Catholic Irish neighborhood, and in a way that in itself had lots of internal, self-directed life. I mean, there was a tight-knit community of very similar people.
Do you know where she grew up?
I don't remember the street off the top of my head, or the parish, but I feel like even in those communities, people can experience transcendence of their community norms in all sorts of ways. And I guess because I'm religious, I think religion is a great outlet for that, because at least the more established religions, have histories and literatures that come from parts of the world that you've never been to and never will travel to. And I feel like there can be an escape from just sort of the confines of parochialism in that. And of course, I don't think that's the only way or the only legitimate way.
I think of New York and everything that it offers as salvation. Especially kind of growing up in a horrible suburb, whereas absolutely, I have kind of the stereotypical background of, a lefty writer. I grew up in the suburbs. I hated it. I counted
Which suburbs?
Minutes till I could get out. A suburb of Buffalo.
Okay.
Oh my God, I hated it. I left home when I was 16, the second I was able to. And, to me, New York City, not only is New York City, was it kind of what was and is, salvation for me personally, but also just kind of modern, and so there's also a deeper, in terms of kind of conservatism and liberalism, there's also, kind of a deeper divide about your attitude towards modernity, which to me, as there is no, it is only modernity that allows a kind of a mouthy woman and B, a Jew to kind of create their own lives. Like women like me throughout history were either usually executed, joined nunneries, or, kind of had husbands who beat them into submission, and then later, and then eventually got to the point where women like me would, sometimes be hospitalized and lobotomized. It's like a very recent thing where there was, in the course of history speaking, a relatively recent thing that there was a society in which somebody like me could thrive. And to me, that is so sacred and so valuable, and that is what I see as being constantly challenged by conservatism. And again, so it's always strange to me when somebody who similarly benefits from living in a kind of wide open and cosmopolitan city like this to have sympathy for a movement that I think is, antithetical to the human flourish, the flourishing of the kind of people who flourish in a city like this.
Yeah, that's interesting. On the one hand, I simply don't, I personally don't politicize, I guess, every aspect. I don't think of everything that's a part of society as belonging to either the left or the right. So in one way, I feel like I'm listening, and I'm trying to understand, and I don't feel. I also suspect that your narration of history. I just don't think of it as. It would be impossible to live the life you live right now in most times and places in history, in most times and places, or most places right now. I agree with you there. I don't view it, though, as this kind of unrelenting misery for everyone that existed, before the 60s. I don't feel like...
Well, I was thinking actually more like before the 20s, but...
Or before the 1700s, or before...
It wasn't unrelenting misery for everyone. It was a lot of unrelenting misery for women. And it was particularly a lot of unrelenting misery for women who weren't good at kind of staying in their place.
Right, but there's all sorts of...
Also a lot of unrelenting misery for Jews who didn't know their place.
Listen, I don't dispute...
I think that there are certain kind of people who could have imagined having a flourishing life in some of these other...
Well, and we know that they did. I mean, we know...
Right.
There's evidence. Even if you look to something, I'm sure that you view as retrograde as the Bible and the Psalms of David, the ideal wife is described as someone conducting business, evaluating properties and real estate. So it wasn't like every single white male was like literally in a closet cowering somewhere. People live their lives, and I guess so. I don't view my ideology as so connected to my place in history and my place in Westchester County, New York. And I don't view... It's interesting. I think your view of New York as salvation, I think that's very evocative language. And it's interesting to me I feel like New York City offers particular freedoms. Right? I don't know if there's one set of freedom that, is...
Well, look, New York City offers particular freedoms to people like me. It obviously doesn't, if I'm looking at, say, like the woman who came here who was probably raped by DSK and will never get justice, it doesn't offer freedoms to, it offers freedoms to those who can afford it and those who can afford to take advantage of them. So I don't want to be too romantic about it.
Right. Yeah, and I would urge you not to... I fully agree with you on that. So it's interesting, though. What is it about Brooklyn? I'm sure we're going over time here, but is there something particular about Brooklyn that has your heart?
I think to me, part of it is just a sense of kind of having fully and completely found the place where I should be. That, to me, is a kind of a magical thing.
Home, yeah. Every great adventure ends with the person going home, right? Discovering a home.
Yeah, and so, again, to me, it's about, it really is a kind of salvation. It's really about as close to religion as I can get, as a kind of congenital non-believer.
That's interesting. It's funny. I view, we plan to talk a little bit about the differences between Brooklyn and Westchester, which are on, I'm just a train ride out of Manhattan too, just a little longer. And Westchester's a kind of funny place. I love it. I live in this little town called Mount Kisco. And it's adorable and suburban in ways that, it has a Gap and, a Cozy and all those other, like, insipid chains right in the heart of town. Although it has a lot of great other, like, independent mom and pops. And I love it. I don't invest it with anything mystical, though. And its faults are very obvious. I always laugh. The Metro North trains that both of our taxes pay for that come into Westchester, they basically skip over the Bronx. It's basically like,
right.
Here's a way to get white people into Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it'll stop at Fordham. Like, unless you get the local, which never seems to come around. It's just, once you get a little bit past White Plains in Westchester, and White Plains is full of plain whites, it just jets right to Harlem for 2 seconds and then gets right into Grand Central. I understand that. And so I guess, I don't know, I guess I don't feel...
You don't have to, you are religious, so maybe you don't have to invest the place you live with all of these values. And also, if you grew up there, because I hated where I grew up so much and spent so much time dreaming of the city, every day I remind myself, that I am so lucky to get to live here.
Right, and it's funny, if I had to invent a psychological reason why I became conservative, right? If I had to, in a sense, say if I decided I wanted to de-rationalize my beliefs, and instead of saying that they're rational arguments, say it was just some crying psychological need, mm-hmm. It would be, actually, there would be all those elements of, like, resentment of freedoms, and feeling like, I grew up in with a single mother, and I do feel it like the sexual revolution and some of the norms that changed out of it enabled my father to leave my mother pregnant and return to Europe, and no one could really say anything bad about it. I mean, if it was a bad judgment, it was completely personal and disconnected from principle. And a lot of kids I know grew up like that. And I felt like, I don't buy that if we had, and I guess I never bought that we would have.
But let me ask you this, and we should wrap this up soon, but let me ask you this, because I actually don't necessarily disagree with you about the fallout from the sexual revolution, but, among kind of the liberal bourgeoisie, things have kind of consolidated, right? So that it actually is people like, the people I know Brooklyn is actually famous for its incredibly obsessive family culture. Right. So it actually has kind of people fall into fairly, they get married later. There's a lot more choice and equality, and these things have, and there's a lot of evidence now that makes for stronger and healthier marriages. And so I don't quite understand. So I would think in a certain way that kind of being, having a genuine unease with kind of the social chaos that came of the freedoms of the sexual revolution, we now see who has been, what kind of societies or what kind of cultures are most successful in reasserting social stability, and they're not conservative ones.
Maybe we could maybe we could advertise to liberals against divorce because your children could turn out reactionary.
Well, you don't have to. I don't know about liberals and conservatives, but
no, just joking.
No, but it's actually, the fact is that, it's actually kind of, overeducated egalitarian couples who, tend to divorce a lot less.
See, but the funny thing is, I think there's an alternate explanation for this. I think that the 70s, where, as Ross points out, divorce and adultery, like disapproval levels went down even among the relatively well-off. I tend to think of that as the aberration, but I think that once you achieve a certain socioeconomic status, there are financial pressures to keep the estate together, and there's financial wherewithal that make it easier for a marriage to survive infidelity, job difficulties, or sickness among children.
Can we pick this up another time? Because there actually is a whole bunch of research about, there's a lot of research about egalitarianism and marital stability that we'll still be talking about. And I actually am going to, speaking of my dear love of Brooklyn, I have to go get a seat for Ghostbusters in the park.
Oh, excellent. Well, we'll leave it at that, and we should get a drink, and I should tell you about Bard College, and you can tell me about egalitarianism. And thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. Yeah, thank you, too.
All right. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.